My name is Anna-Katrine Gudme, and it is my pleasure to bid you all welcome to our second lecture in this digital lecture series on ancient attraction, where we explore the dynamics of beauty, power, and sex appeal in the ancient world. So basically, all the good topics. The title of our lecture this afternoon is Gender and Beauty in the Hebrew Bible, and it will be presented to us by Dr. Hanna Tervanotko from McMaster University in Canada. She's assistant professor there, assistant professor of religious studies. And Hanna, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be with us today and to present. And I know it's quite early where you are, so good morning. Before I mute myself and give the microphone to Hanna, I'm just going to mention a few practical details. So we have an hour and 15 minutes for our lecture this afternoon, and Hanna is going to talk for roughly half an hour. And so after that, we have ample time for questions and discussion. So please, during the lecture, if you have comments, questions you'd like to ask, please make either physical or mental notes, and then we'll take questions and comments during the latter 30 minutes of our time together. And I shall try to chair the Q&A after Hanna's lecture. When we do get to the Q&A, I'd like to ask you to use the raise your hand function in Zoom, the digital hand. In case you would like to make a comment, and if you can for some reason not make that work, please feel free to send me a comment in the chat and I'll add you to the speakers list. But the thing is that we're too many people today that for me to be able to see all of you in one Zoom gallery. So if you raise your physical hand in front of the screen like this, I may not be able to see all of you. So the digital hand function or the chat function are the safer options, but I'll mention this again when we get to it. Right, so this I think is enough about the technicalities of the lecture. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Hanna Tervanotko is Assistant Professor of Religious Studies at McMaster University in Canada. Hanna has been at McMaster since 2017, the year she also was appointed docent at Helsinki University. And before she came to McMaster, she was a research associate at the Catholic University in Leuven in Belgium. Hanna has a PhD in biblical studies from the University of Helsinki, with a specialization in Hebrew Bible and Second Temple Judaism. In recent years, Hanna's research has focused particularly on two themes. One is female figures in ancient Jewish texts, and then the second theme is Greek and Jewish divination practices. An example of her former research focus, which is the female figures in ancient Jewish texts, was her doctoral dissertation, which was on the figure of Miriam in ancient Jewish literature. It was published by Van den Hug and Ruprecht in 2016. Comes highly recommended. Hanna's current research project is on technical divination in ancient Jewish texts, and it will, in due time, result in a monograph, which I'm looking very much forward to. I think for everyone who's gathered here today to hear Hanna's lecture, one of her publications that is one of my personal favorites, but will also, I think, be of particular interest to everyone here today, is her brilliant 2015 article called Gendered Beauty, Observations on Portraying Beautiful Men and Women in the Hebrew Bible. It was published in a Festschrift in 2015, which is a little hard to come by, I think, but it's also on Hanna's academia page, so you can find it there together with a lot of other brilliant publications. So Hanna is now working on another article where she's developing her thoughts on beauty and gender as a kind of continuation of the 2015 article, and it's some of this work that she's going to share with us today. So again, a very, very warm welcome to you, Hanna. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'm going to mute myself now. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne, so much for your kind words and also for your invitation to speak in your lecture series. Wow, I'm just watching these little icons of colleagues all over the place, like popping up, and it's quite overwhelming given that I've spent the last half a year in my own home and not seeing so many people physically. So thank you so much for joining today. It's such an honor. Yeah, I'll start by just saying that I loved 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, when was it, when we had Dr. Cancel speaking to us. And that really inspired me when I was making the last changes to my paper. So I really look forward to discussion today. And like Anna said in her words, this comes out of my present research project on divination. And what I've been particularly thinking about recently are the techniques of physiognomy and how appearance traits in a person's looks are believed to carry some signs about their future. So perhaps some of that that explains to you a little bit where I come from in this paper. All right, now there is the task of trying to share my screen, which is always a little bit stressful. I hope you can see it soon. Okay, can somebody give me a sign if this works? Yeah, I'll trust that. That's okay, we're good to go. Okay. I don't manage to, yes, here we go. In this lecture, I will analyze how adjective beautiful is connected with men and women in the text of the Hebrew Bible. Beauty is present in various forms in the narratives of the Hebrew Bible, where several individuals are described to be beautiful, yafeh. In the first part of my paper, I will explore how significantly this term is attributed to both men and women, yet their beauty has different implications. Most notably, women are portrayed as beautiful much more frequently than men, suggesting that ancient authors may have been more interested in women's looks than appearances of men. Further, with regards to men, their beauty always carries positive connotations, whereas women's beauty also carries some negative associations. Beautiful women are frequently subjected to threat of violence. In the second part of the paper, I turn to analyze these narratives on beautiful figures through the lens of social-scientific studies that have demonstrated how physical attractiveness is often interpreted as a sign of an individual overall success in life. I will ask to what extent this dynamic is reflected in the Hebrew Bible. Does beauty suggest success, and how negative perceptions of beauty play out in the texts? To begin with, it's helpful to point out that whereas in the Western philosophical and theological discourse, the word beautiful covers human beauty, divine beauty, and natural beauty, meanwhile, the text of the Hebrew Bible suggests that in ancient Israel, there were more than one different categories, which could have been understood as aesthetic appreciation. This means, for instance, that there are terms that are typically used to describe exclusively divine beauty. Other words that refer to beauty are used mostly to describe humans, and here I mean especially yafeh, which is the most commonly used for that purpose in the Hebrew Bible. The term yafeh implies beauty as a physical quality and something which is pleasant to see. Literally, the Hebrew verb means to be or to become beautiful, and to decorate or to beautify oneself. It is important to distinguish the term yafeh from the term tov, which has broader semantic fields. In contrast to yafeh, which signifies merely physical appearance, tov also can indicate inner nature of the object. Moreover, in other languages, the term beautiful, for instance in Greek kalos, may translate with this broader connotation. Thus, they would indicate inner quality too. So when I move to my next examples, it is good to keep in mind that when examining the passages of the Hebrew Bible, the term beautiful strictly refers to physical aesthetics. Ancient authors use the term beautiful for 4 male figures in the Hebrew Bible: Joseph, David, Absalom, and the male lover in Song of Songs 1:16. They are all praised for their beauty. I will focus on the named characters today. They appear in prose narratives, and we can analyze how their beauty plays out in their stories. Reading the text chronologically, the first to appear is Joseph in Genesis 39:6. It reads, "Now Joseph was handsome and good-looking." And I'm here using the translation from the New Revised Standard Version, and I think already this is quite interesting how the term beautiful is rendered with terms handsome and good-looking when we talk about a male figure. Apart from this explicit mention of his beauty, his physical appearances receive some interest in the narratives. For instance, the narrator mentions Jacob giving him a long robe with sleeves, which makes him stand out from his brothers. This is probably an unusual garment, as his brothers envy him for it. When Joseph is in Egypt, he takes care of his looks. He's narrated to shave. He also decorates himself by wearing a signet ring on his finger and a gold chain on his neck. Joseph's beauty is closely connected with his exemplary characteristics. This is particularly noticeable in the narrative of Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife seemingly desires Joseph because of his attractive physical appearance, as she cast her eyes on Joseph. She wants to sleep with him, but the author tells how Joseph resists Potiphar's wife's advances. Joseph's refusal of Potiphar's wife may be an indication of his moral integrity and piety. Sleeping with her would be a sign against God, as said in Genesis 39:9. Hence, Joseph is portrayed as morally superior to Potiphar's wife. He does not engage in adultery, even when the consequence of it means putting himself in a danger. David's beauty is mentioned twice in the Hebrew Bible. First, it's referred to in 1 Samuel 16, when David is first introduced. He was ruddy, had beautiful eyes, and was handsome. Second, in 1 Samuel 17, the author reveals that Goliath disdains David because he is a youth, ruddy, and handsome in appearance. Unlike Joseph, whose beauty is not specified, these passages reflect some interesting details on David's appearance. In both passages, he is described as ruddy, meaning that his skin color is reddish or pinkish. Athalia Brenner and Saul Olien have pointed out how some ancient authors appear to appreciate rudiness as a skin color. For instance, in the Song of Songs, rudiness is a quality of the praised male lover. My beloved is gleaming and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. Also, the author of 1 Samuel 17 refers to David's eyes as a part of his body that is beautiful, and that is particularly highlighted in this context. I will discuss the eyes more in detail in a moment. The third man whose beauty receives attention in the Hebrew Bible is David's son Absalom, whose beauty is referred to in 2 Samuel 14. Now in all Israel there was no one to be praised so much for his beauty as Absalom. For the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. The reference to from his foot to his head can indicate the author's emphasis on Absalom's harmonious beauty. From his, because it covers every part of his body and can suggest that every part of him is considered equally beautiful. It can also speak about his beauty and could suggest that the author perceived his beauty as ideally symmetrical. This means that his whole body was beautiful, in contrast to just one part of it. The mention that he is without any blemish can add to this beauty. It has been suggested that it could indicate that Absalom lacked any visible disability. Interestingly, Absalom's hair receives particular attention in the narrative. His hair is mentioned in 2 Samuel 14, where the author explains how Absalom cut his hair once a year when it became too heavy. This implies maybe a fast-growing thick hair. And actually his hair then gets more attention in the narrative when he gets caught in an oak and his enemies kill him. There are traditions that suggest that he got stuck in the oak because with this big hair in the branches of the tree. Meanwhile, Song of Songs 5:11 suggests that raven black is an ideal hair color, and I quote, "His head is the finest gold, his locks are wavy, black as raven." With regard to these male figures that are described with the adjective beautiful, I would like to highlight a few aspects. First, as we have seen, the term beautiful does not reveal much about men's looks. It only allows a partial reconstruction of how some ancient authors perceived male beauty ideals, including references to skin color, sorry, I got lost, skin color, hair, and overall harmonious beauty. It does not allow us to imagine how these characters actually were imagined to look like. And that is, of course, now in contrast to all these art images that I'm sharing with you that are only later interpretations of their looks. Second, Joseph, David, and Absalom are connected with rich literary traditions in the Hebrew Bible. Their beauty is only one aspect of their portrayals, an aspect which does not define their actions or their significance. Let me now turn to those passages that refer to the beautiful women in the Hebrew Bible and highlight how the term beautiful, yafeh, is employed in them. Women who are described with this term include Tamar, sister of Amnon and Absalom, Job's daughters, female lover in the Song of Songs, Rebecca, Vashti, Sarah, Abigail, Tamar, daughter of Absalom, Esther, and Abishag. This list demonstrates how ancient authors are interested in women's beauty. As no other adjective is as often connected with female figures, one can say that beauty appears to be one of the woman's most important qualities, and perhaps the most important one. Female portrayals, similar to men's descriptions, often lack details that would illustrate specific ancient beauty preferences. Yet some narratives shed light on authors' aesthetic ideals. For instance, Rachel's beauty is emphasized next to the possible non-beauty of her sister Leah in Genesis 29. Leah's eyes were lovely, and Rachel was graceful and beautiful. Whereas the exact meaning of the Hebrew term which defines Leah's eyes is uncertain, it's interesting how Rachel's overall beauty is here contrasted by Leah's eyes. Also, in this passage, remember how the author of 1 Samuel 16 narrates that David's eyes are beautiful. As the terms used for David's and Leah's eyes are different, one should conclude that Leah's eyes are not perceived as equally beautiful to David's eyes. When discussing Rachel and Leah, the author's preference for beauty over lovely eyes is communicated in the next sentence, which clarifies that Jacob loved Rachel, the beautiful sister. This description of Rachel and Leah provides some details on the beauty ideals in the ancient world. As noted above regarding Absalom, who has no blemishes, ancient authors appear to prefer harmonious beauty and symmetry in all body parts. This is noticeable in the art of the Greco-Roman era, where body parts of statues are completely symmetrical. For the same reason, Leah, whose eyes are lovely, cannot compete with Rachel, who is perceived as generally beautiful. Because the references on women's beauty are multiple, I will only highlight a few more passages that concern beautiful women. In some narratives, beauty goes together with other abilities, and beautiful women appear as capable and resourceful. The authors of the Hebrew Bible portray especially figures such as Abigail and Esther as clever and resourceful women. Abigail's beauty is described in 1 Samuel 25, which reads, "Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was clever and beautiful, but the man was surly and mean. He was a Calebite." In this narrative, Abigail's beauty and cleverness are contrasted with her husband's uneven qualities and his general passiveness. In a similar vein, the figure of Esther is described as both beautiful and clever. In Esther 2:7, Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The girl was fair and beautiful. The author may emphasize Esther's beauty to explain why she enters the harem in the first place and why she later becomes the queen. Significantly, when Esther enters the harem, more attention is given to her looks, and she receives some type of cosmetic treatment before meeting the king, including 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics for women. At least some of this treatment probably aimed at beautifying Esther and making her physical appearance even more desirable. The text also tells that Esther is crowned as the queen and everyone who sees her admires her. Whereas the author does not detail Esther's intellectual qualities, they are very clearly present in the narrative. Due to her cleverness, bravery, and action, the Jews are saved. Whereas Abigail and Esther are known also for their intellect, for other female figures, beauty is the only aspect of their characters that the ancient authors mention. For instance, this is the only quality of King David's last companion, Abishag, that the authors make known. So they searched for a beautiful girl throughout all the territory of Israel and found Abishag the Shunammite and brought her to the king. Other examples of figures whose only known quality are their beauty include Job's daughters and Absalom's daughter Tamar. In these texts, it appears that the daughter's beauty somehow adds to the status of the father. For instance, when 2 Samuel 14 outlines Absalom's general excellence, his daughter's beauty should be understood along those same lines. It seems to be an indication of Absalom's own success. One explanation for this could be that the beautiful daughters were more likely to find a husband. Thus, the parents did not need to worry about their future so much. For instance, in Ben Sirah 42, a daughter is a secret anxiety to her father, and worry over her robs him of sleep. When she is young, for the fear that she may not marry, or if married, for the fear that she may be disliked. Finally, let me turn to 2 narratives where women's beauty plays a very different role. The figures of Sarah and Tamar meet violence because of their beauty. First concerns Genesis 12, where Abraham and Sarah are about to enter Egypt. Abraham expresses his concern about how he may be killed because of Sarah's beauty. And I quote, "I know well that you are a beautiful woman in appearance." A few verses later, the authors confirm that the Egyptians indeed find Sarah beautiful, and after they praise her beauty to Pharaoh, she is taken into Pharaoh's house. Scholarship on this text has long focused on the protagonist of the passage, Abraham. It has been emphasized how he is in danger because of his beautiful wife. Meanwhile, Sarah's own perspective has been overlooked. Only recently, some of the implications that the beauty has on Sarah have been addressed. Forced removal into Pharaoh's house, possible sexual violence she's subjected to, and Abraham and Pharaoh discussing her fate, whereas Sarah's own voice is not heard anywhere in this passage. Tamar's beauty plays a crucial role in 2 Samuel 13, and I quote, "David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and David's son Amnon fell in love with her." The author appears to make a connection between Tamar's beauty and Amnon's love, suggesting that Amnon desires her because of her looks. And here, think about the similar dynamic between Joseph and Potiphar's wife, where she desires him because of his appearance. Amnon's desire for Tamar is so strong that against her will, he takes her by force. The author is explicit about Tamar's resistance and her begging Amnon not to violate her. But, and I quote, "he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her." After Tamar's rape, the narrative tells how she put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. The narrator tells how after the rape, she remains to live in Absalom's house as a desolated woman. The narratives I have referred to offer little glimpses of how ancient authors perceived beauty. Yet, as they do not answer the question of why the protagonists of the Hebrew Bible are described as beautiful, what does their beauty entail in these narratives? Meanwhile, recent social scientific studies demonstrate how people regularly draw a connection between beauty and success in life. For instance, Marshall Dermer and Darrell Thiel showed their test group photographs of different looking people and had them estimate the characters of the people in their images. The results of this test showed that the participants connected physically attractive people with socially desirable features and assumed that they were more successful in their professional and private lives than less attractive people in the photographs. It has been established how in many cultures beauty is perceived as correlation with intelligence, social skills, and health. And at this point, I have to just reassure you that this connection is only a perception. There is no study that would demonstrate the relationship between beauty and any cognitive ability. Scholars have also argued that the strong perception that what is beautiful is good creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Attractive people are often more self-confident, which in turn translates into a noticeable advantage in face-to-face communication. As a result, beautiful people are often good at oral communication and are not afraid to communicate their views. There are numerous examples of how this plays out in society. Because of the greater expectations connected with attractiveness, teachers devote more attention to good-looking children, and attractive people are assumed to do better in the job market than their unattractive counterparts. The images that I chose here sort of exploit this stereotype. They do not represent any real people. As you can see, are sort of like stereotypical and obvious examples of this what is beautiful is good stereotype, but I can only assure you that if you make this research in internet with the keywords what is good is beautiful and what is ugly is bad, you will find a lot of examples of, for instance, of celebrities and known people like who are connected with these traits. Thus, beauty does not only provide the individual with an advantage, but attractive people are also benefit from the surrounding society, which actively fosters the advantage. For instance, it appears that beautiful people have more success in marriage than less attractive people. They also generally receive better service wherever they are. It has also been argued that people's look affect their general satisfaction and level of happiness. For all these reasons, attractive individuals have advantage in almost all spheres of life. Finally, it's important to acknowledge that women's look have a stronger implication for their lives than men's appearance. Women are expected to take better care of their looks and consequently are evaluated according to their physical appearance. Also, while societies appear to favor attractive-looking people, studies have shown how beautiful women are also subjected to certain negative stereotypes. They are perceived to be seeking status and wealth and as being vain and self-centered. Attractive-looking women are also perceived as likely to engage in adultery. Thus, when a beautiful woman is prosecuting a rapist, it has been demonstrated that she may have difficulties in communicating that she did not engage in the activity. I will dedicate this last part of my paper to analyzing the ancient text of beauty from this angle, how beauty is a promise of success in the Hebrew Bible, and how that success in life plays out differently in narratives on men and on women. I argue that social scientific reading can illuminate the text, especially in Western culture where socioscientific studies were conducted and where the biblical texts have been interpreted for long. And maybe another question here to think about is that how how this stereotypical reading has influenced our interpretation over the years. Atalia Brenner has argued that for men, beauty is a sign of political excellence, whereas women's beauty determines her private socio-sexual behavior in the narratives of the Hebrew Bible. This theory aligns very well with the social scientific studies. First, as pointed out above, beauty is not a defining characteristic of Joseph, David, and Absalom, but rather only one aspect of them among many others. This is especially true for Joseph and David, who are early on singled out from their brothers. Their physical appearances appear to play some role in their selection. Joseph's robe is a visible symbol that highlights his distinction, both how he is more loved than his brothers, but also how he is different from them. Looks of David's 7 brothers do not receive any attention in the narrative, perhaps suggesting that they were ordinary, and there is nothing that the author wants to mention. In contrast to them, David's physical attractiveness is instantly highlighted. Absalom is said to be more beautiful than anyone else in the whole Israel. Also in line with Brenner's argument, these two characters are politically successful and they quickly advance in powerful positions where they influence politics. Meanwhile, Absalom's sense of justice is highlighted in those stories that narrate his revenge on Amnon. Interestingly, men's looks have little significance, if any, for their marriages. David Kleins has written about David's casual approach to women. He is beautiful and he clearly attracts beautiful-looking women. Yet importantly, he does not get attached to anyone. In contrast to that, Joseph is explicitly narrated not to be shallow. He does not take any advantage of his looks, but rather demonstrates high moral standards. And I was thinking that in the biblical narrative, it doesn't really tell anything about Asenath and about her looks, but in the pseudepigraphic text, Joseph and Asenath, the author is very interested in Asenath's looks and describes her as a very beautiful woman. All in all, taking into consideration there are several exemplary qualities where beauty is just one of them, the portrayals of Joseph and David highlight their special relationship with the deity and their divine selection. Genesis 39 narrates, and I quote, "The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because Lord was with him, and whatever he did, Lord made it prosper." Also, David is successful in all his undertakings because 1 Samuel 14 explains, "The Lord was with him." Against these backgrounds that highlight their success, it seems only natural that the ancient authors portrayed these figures as beautiful. With regard to women, beauty has some different implications in their lives. I have pointed out above that the physical appearance of women seems to be the primary issue when it comes to the subject of marriage. Men pay attention to women's beauty, and in many cases, other qualities are considered only after that, if at all. Despite this keen interest in women's physical appearance, some female figures are more elaborated in the narratives of the Hebrew Bible, and their intellect is emphasized. However, as noted by Brenner, these aspects are not signs of their political excellence. Beautiful women do not reach politically significant positions. Rather, beauty is interpreted as a symbol of their private socio-sexual success. This is evident, for instance, with the clever figures of Abigail and Esther, whose beauty allows them to marry powerful men. Esther enters harem because of her beauty, and David seems to be attracted to Abigail, and especially her appearance. Hence, the impact of the beauty is recognized in their private lives. Finally, similar to Dermer and Thiel's study, which reveals negative perception on beautiful women, I argue that beauty makes some female figures vulnerable in the Hebrew Bible narratives. This is particularly true for Sarah and Tamar, whose own voices are completely neglected in the narratives that concern them. In Genesis 12, only Abraham speaks and instructs his wife on how she should behave. And in the scholarship, if you read history of research on this passage, it's quite striking how it's been argued that Sarah's silence here means that she approves and she somehow agrees with what is proposed. Tamar tries to speak up for herself in the passage. After the rape, she begs Amnon not to send her away, but he calls the servant and orders, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." When Tamar then turns to her brother Absalom, also he silences her, saying, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Be quiet now, my sister. He's your brother. Do not take this to heart." Hence, Sarah and Tamar, these beautiful women, are not only subjected to violence due to their looks, but also have difficulties in communicating about it. Aligning with Dermer and Thiel's study, we should pay attention to the fact that the vulnerability appears to be a predominantly female experience. Concerning the beautiful man, Joseph, who refuses Potiphar's wife, he appears to be in danger momentarily when his master puts him in prison. Yet by refusing Potiphar's wife, his own morality is elevated in the narrative. He could take advantage of his looks, but he doesn't. If one compares the Joseph story with the narratives concerning the beautiful female figures who are in danger, we can note that the narratives differ from each other in one remarkable aspect. Joseph, who refuses Potiphar's wife, remains throughout the narrative a somewhat autonomous character who has the situation in his own hands. Having divine protection on his side, he can decide for himself. Meanwhile, the beautiful female figures are dealt with different ways. Female figures also are desired, yet for them, the external desire presents a real danger. Moreover, vis-a-vis Joseph, they do not decide for themselves. Their voices are hardly heard in the stories, and it's difficult to see them as autonomous agents in their respective narratives. Ultimately, other people, the figures around them, decide their destinies. Conclusions. In this talk, I addressed known characters in the Hebrew Bible who are described as beautiful, yafeh. The study reveals that the adjective is used very differently for men and women in the biblical narratives. For men, it designates exemplarity and power, whereas with regards to women, beauty is often evaluated from the perspective of the closest male kin. If a woman is beautiful, her husband or father is proud of her. For intelligent female figures, beauty is a promise that she will marry a prominent and powerful figure. When analyzing the narratives through the lens of recent socio-scientific studies, it appears that some of the contemporary perceptions of beauty may also be reflected in the ancient narratives. Beauty premium promises certain success in life, but that can play out differently for men and women. Good looks also carry a negative perception, which can result in vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanna. And I suppose we can try with a Zoom applause with the little digital hands, and then perhaps we can give you a proper applause towards the end of today. But thank you for this presentation, and it really opens so many interesting perspectives and lines of a discussion. So now our discussion is open. So please, if you would like to make a comment, either send me a message in the chat or raise your digital hands. And actually, because we are quite a big group today, I would like to encourage you maybe to just send me a chat message if you want to make a comment, because that way I think it will be a little bit easier for me to make sure I don't overlook anyone. And I think while people gather their thoughts, I actually have a question that I would like to ask myself, if I may, just sort of use my privilege as the chair. Because you mentioned Absalom, and he's one of my absolute favorites in the Hebrew Bible. He intrigues me. And I have two questions actually, and they're sort of going slightly in two directions. One is about Absalom's hair. He's portrayed, as you mentioned, as with this big hair, really good hair, and it's part of his beauty feature is this amazing hair. How do you interpret the reference to Absalom's hair here? Is it a little bit like with the ruddiness that you mentioned earlier, that it's like a sign of youthfulness, perhaps, that it's not thinning, or could it be a sign of strength and virility rather? So that's the one thing about Abshalom's hair, and the other thing is he does end up hanging from a tree in this beautiful hair. So would he be a slightly different example than Joseph, that he's actually the one who meets his doom through his beauty, but he's also a man? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, thank you. Really fascinating thoughts. Does this mean, could that be a sign of youthfulness, like the thick hair? I had not thought about it, but now that you say it, maybe we can make certain conclusions about when comes the moment that the hair starts to get thinner and eventually fall. That it would be that maybe this is a sign of his youth. But honestly, I had not thought about that. So this is a new thought for me. I had more. I was thinking about this. I think the passage says something about the hair being like wavy and really like how it grows. It seems to somehow signify some power, but I hadn't thought about the aesthetics perspective. And your second question was on the death. Yes, you're right. Like he's that's why I thought that actually the stories on David and Joseph somewhat seem to align together better. Like there are more similarities between those two, at least when thinking about this selection from the young age and how they stand out from their peers. Yet, as I said, Absalom is also described more beautiful than anyone in Israel. So there is something there too, but certainly his story seems to be a little bit like there are different nuances when it's compared with David and Joseph.
Right. Thank you very much. So almost I'm trying to categorize them. You almost have Tamar at one end and Joseph at the other, and then Abshalom, he's hovering somewhere in between in a way. Perhaps you could say that. But sorry, I'll move on to our list of speakers here, which is growing rapidly. And our first one, I think, was Omar and Shia. Please go ahead, Omar.
Let me just, okay, can you hear me? Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Hanna, for that. Thank you. I really particularly enjoyed the comparison, because we don't see that very frequently. We don't really see, comparative work done on that level. My question here is, how problematic is the fact that these men are being observed by other men and the narrative is directed to other male readers, right? So how much does a sort of normative gender sexuality base in the context of production allow the male gaze to fall on the lusciousness of the hair and the physical attributes? And is it, does the gaze stay longer on the female because we are to assume a sort of normative base of the narrative, or is it more problematic than that? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's an excellent perspective, like to really ask about the gaze on these figures, and it's something that I did not address in my talk. The question that whose gaze we have, and of course, like you sort of answered to that, like who are the authors, and the gaze is on, like maybe we are more used to looking at the gaze on women's bodies. But of course, you're right. Like these are also, when we talk about these beautiful men, it means that somebody is observing them and somebody is elaborating their looks and talks about it. I don't know. You talked about problematic. You mentioned that.
Yes, this was, you know, in the sense that, you know, the gaze doesn't seem to linger so much, right? And the way you sort of seem to point to, you know, the political significance, you know, to the male beauty rather than the erotic significance of the description of the hair. And do you know what I mean? It's this sort of, you know, these figures are described as having these alluring or, you know, handsome formation, sort of linking it to their political formation as and then it becomes a sort of body politic rather than just a sexual objectification of that male body, which we're then sort of seeing, which we're seeing in your presentation, we're seeing in the description of the female attribute.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like that's helpful to point out to that detail that precisely that for women their looks and the gaze, what they discover in the looks has consequences for their private life and even like some threat. Whereas in there is the case of Joseph where this also he's vulnerable for a moment, but it does not have that long consequences for him, or he comes out of that threat very quickly in some way. So I think like you're right, like that the male beauty is just another sign of their success, and it doesn't pose a similar threat as for women.
Right. I don't know if you've looked into this, but do the same sort of configurations, modalities of gazing apply to younger and older people, like younger generations, for like kids, for children?
I have not looked at that.
Yeah.
I know the literature you're talking about, and there's quite a bit has been written on the gaze and in the narratives of the Hebrew Bible,
right.
Ancient Jewish texts. But I think like I come a little bit from a different perspective.
Right,
so
right. I'm sort of curious to see whether, you know, whether you're allowed to say a lot more about the physical attributes of somebody who's younger than somebody who is your social equal and you know, or a politically superior figure. So yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you for that, and thank
you very much.
It was really nice. Thank you.
Right. Thank you both very much. And then the next question on my list is Naomi Gretz. Naomi, would you like to ask your question or make your comment?
Yeah. I think you should add some things to your list. First of all, the pretty women in Deuteronomy 21. That should be added to your list, because if you're talking about the vulnerability of a beautiful woman who's captive in war, and that's her description of the captive woman, add that to your list in any sort of discussion. The second thing, as far as male looks, there's a wonderful. I live in Israel, and there's a wonderful satirical program which is called HaYehudim Ba'im, the Jews are coming, in which Joseph is depicted clearly as homosexual, full of himself as a beautiful figure, and you should try to get a hold of it. Some of them have subtitles in English, and I think it will possibly explain, you know, his relationship or non-relationship, and you might want to change your mind even about including him as with beauty as attractive to women, because his beauty may also be attractive to men. And then one other thing, which I think is worthwhile looking at, where Samuel is actually admonished for choosing, or at the beginning, one of David's brothers. He chooses the first brother, he says, and God says to him, don't stop here. Don't be impressed by his height, which is apparently a sign of beauty in men, and his appearance. And I think that should be, there's a negativity as far as that's concerned. And also, which might imply that David is not so good looking. In other words, in that particular section, he's the runt, he's the smallest one. I mean, he's described later as being perhaps attractive, but in this particular context, not necessarily. And Saul, interestingly enough, also is described as being very good looking, tall, and, you know, we say today, tall, dark, and handsome. I don't know about dark, I don't know about handsome, but certainly tall as a characteristic, with the implication that that's a sign of a leader, and he ends up being a failed leader for whatever he may look like. And so I think that these are things that should be looked at. And I agree with, I don't know who made that comment before, I forgot, but I agree with whoever implied, I think it was Anne, the opening question with Abshilam. There's a lot of implications that his beauty gets in trouble, and as much as women get into trouble because of their beauty.
Thank you for all this insights. For the Deuteronomy, is this the passage on the beautiful captive woman?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. No, I was here more focusing on like people who we know by names, and who we have more and more narratives about them, and we know a little bit more, and can somehow like place the beauty to some broader context. But I think that's a great point, and I was thinking about her, like how, well, first of all, like that it's specific that in the situation of war you can take this beautiful woman, so you shouldn't like not just any woman, but if it's a beautiful woman, she can be taken as a captive, and what follows there. And I know then this rule gets repeated in the text of Quran, for instance. What are the procedures then to keep this woman? Your point on Joseph's homosexuality, thank you for that. I think that's there are studies, and like studies that make use of masculinity theories where this has been explored. I was at one point when writing this presentation, I was thinking about like, well, very stereotypical, maybe like in relation to the social scientific studies and how women are expected to take care of their looks. And of course, like how stereotypically, I think in Western culture, that same expectation is sort of put on gay men. Or at least that's very stereotypical thinking, that who are then the people like who take care of their looks. So that could be something interesting to think about more. Another, like when you then mentioned like maybe David was not really that good looking, one thing that came to my mind was that how would it be possible that maybe this beauty is in some, when it's connected with some powerful figures, would that be a later attribute, sort of that that it's really important then also to emphasize this quality, like sort of to get like this overall perfect exemplary figure that I don't know, just thinking aloud that. Yeah.
One more thing,
maybe traditions grow, and then it becomes more important to highlight the beauty.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in and ask you to make it brief, because my list is still growing.
So just one thing is you don't seem to make a distinction. I don't know what translation you're using, but between Yafat Toar and Yafat Mar'eh. All right, Toar is more characteristics and Mar'eh is more appearance. And I think you should make a distinction in terms of your analysis between the two when you rewrite your paper or whatever. I think it's very important to make that distinction.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both very much. And the next on my list is Benedicte Björkmo. Benedicte, would you like to jump in?
Yes, I would. Hi. Thank you for great lecture. I wonder, in the book of Esther, the king is searching for beautiful young virgins. What is the relation between youth or age and beauty in the Hebrew Bible, or especially maybe the book of Esther?
Thank you. I'm getting all these new insights for the topic. What's the relationship with youth and beauty? Would that be the sort of a stereotypical? Well, I don't know. Like I would have to. I don't know about the entering the harem. Is that only for young women. I actually, a student of mine, Catherine Fitzgerald, is writing about women in the Jewish novella, and I think like she's been dealing with this passage recently. But if I think about, maybe somebody can correct me, like that most of the people who are described beautiful, it does seem to connect sort of like a young age. I don't know now, like, is any of these figures would be sort of more mature character? But even, I'm even thinking like the last companion to King David, Abishag, like she's told to be young. Or does this sort of come, or do we stereotypically interpret the passages that in Western culture we tend to connect beauty with the younger age? What do you think?
I don't know. I just read a lot in the book of Esther, and it seems like it's so important that she's young and beautiful. So I'm thinking, okay, and I saw another question about age and beauty in the Hebrew Bible. So I just, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious about, is only younger women beautiful, for example?
I think there's something interesting to be discussed there, because at least like these figures like Tamar and Rachel, like they are unmarried, so at least like that seems to correlate that it is a certain type of a woman the author has in mind. Yeah, I don't know if I can say more, but I think that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And then next is Stephanie Boudin. Stephanie, go ahead.
There, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the question I had was, what do you think of the characters of, and it came up, I think also, Saul and Bathsheba, because these are two individuals who are, Saul at least is presented as one of the best looking of the Israelites, and ultimately this is presented as being, he's good looking, but he's not that bright. He's a pretty boy, we would say in the United States at any rate, but winds up being a pretty bad king. And then you also have the example of Bathsheba, who functionally gets raped and her husband gets murdered because at least David finds her attractive when he is being a peeping Tom watching her bathe. So how do these figure into your narratives? What do you think of these characters?
I think Bathsheba would have been an excellent example for to be discussed, especially from the last part of my paper that addresses the social scientific studies, and that I think that she fits that sort of that stereotype perfectly. Of course, like she is described as a beautiful female figure, and she does meet sexual violence. But the reason I did not include her was really that the term beautiful is not connected with her, and I only wanted to like kind of use that as a way to restrict, as a way to limit the passages that I analyze. And there, of course, there are other figures too, like what one could, like also Rebecca, who I think would be a very interesting figure to analyze here. So she's sort of pinpointed because of her good looks, but again, she's not described as to be beautiful. Yeah, Saul, that's quite a different character then, like to think him as a beautiful, because there's so much more that would not suggest him to be an exemplary character.
Mm-hmm.
But would that there be also a sign of political power?
Mm-hmm.
Right, thank you both. Then I have Arlene Enriquez. Arlene, would you like to jump in?
Oh, hi. Okay, so my question was about older women, which is probably what they said. I noticed that, like, mostly in the Bible, while they do mention older women, they don't really necessarily mention them as beautiful, sometimes cunning and sometimes wise, but not necessarily considered to be beautiful. So I always wonder how that factors in.
This is a little bit similar of what we discussed earlier. I'm kind of intrigued to go back to the definition of this term yafeh, and to think like if it's only about that maybe we associate some inner qualities to the beauty too. Like see it more broadly, but is it about the ancient authors that when they describe someone as beautiful, they have a particular type of image in mind?
Right. Well, there are parameters like, the long flowing hair or lift of graceful figure.
I don't know because this unfortunately the narratives are quite brief on the description of the physical appearance, and at least in these narratives on specific figures, they share very little details of how these characters looked like. And I think that's really one of the reasons, like why the art images on them can go pretty much to any direction, because
we don't know anything.
Yeah, because there are no features that are shared.
Now, I was just curious because, like, older women can be astonishingly striking and beautiful and wise, but
I would agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. I'm just going to manipulate the list a little bit and bring in Amy Gansell here, our speaker from the first lecture, because Amy, you had a comment exactly on this topic. So Amy, please go ahead.
The comment that I just added? Okay, so I was thinking that perhaps regardless of age and regardless of the physical condition of the body, that it's the fertile body that might be conceptually beautiful, and that could be regardless of age, in Sarah's case being older at that time, but possibly even regardless of how long ago a woman bore children. If she had had many children when she was young, the beauty of her as a fertile woman might be something she carries with her through her life.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, of course, I'm thinking that. Yeah, I saw when I wrote on this Genesis passage. Yeah, actually, a lot of the commentaries, I should say here, they're quite sexist. There's a whole conversation of how, like, a calculation of how old Sarah is in Genesis 12, and how a woman of that age looks like. And it's pretty disturbing to read that it's a scholarly conversation of whether a woman of this age can be considered beautiful anymore. But of course, another topic here is to ask if like these narratives that address her fertility and Genesis 12, like how well do they go together? Like do they belong together or not? But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So next on my list is Francis Borchardt. Francis, please go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, Hanna. So you mentioned in the description of Abshilam that the description begins with the feet and ends with the head, as well as mentioning that it's a very short description. So this is notably very different from the typical descriptions that we have of women's beauty, for example, of Sarah and Genesis Apocryphon, or of the clever woman in Proverbs 31, or the woman in Song of Songs. These are all head to toe, and they're much more descriptive. So do you have any idea what the significance of this is, of starting from the feet and going up to the head with the man? And if there is any significance, does it have to do with Absalom's fate? I was just a little bit curious about that, if you have any ideas.
Thank you. Yes, yesterday I was reading this article by Laura Quick on the woman in 4Q184, and how like all her body is described. So there's so you're right. Like there's quite a lot of scholarly interest now in this type of a description on women. And whether they reflect like ancient physiognomics, or it's this WASP type of genre. I don't know. Like I think like this was so short that for me it's difficult to connect it. Like to see that it would be a similar description on Absalom as, or to compare it with, like you said, Sarah in Genesis Apocryphon, or the woman in Proverbs 31. Yet it was striking that the author refers to the whole body, but as these details are lacking, I don't know if I would connect it with that genre of literature, because it seems to me that it's important that the details are important in those descriptions on the women. So it's quite different. So I have to think about it more, but I think I would. To me, it sounded like it was more a way to emphasize he's how the author says that he's more beautiful than anyone in Israel, and and then I did suggest that there was something like that. All the body is beautiful, in contrast to just singling out one part of it.
Right, thank you. Then I have Christian. Christian, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Dr. Hanna, I would like to ask, is there, in the Hebrew Bible, is there any connection with beauty and character? I mean, at any point, beauty is related to the attributes of a person. And the other question is, were people in the Hebrew Bible sometimes described as beautiful because of their skin color?
Thank you. Yeah. So does this what is beautiful is good? Does that really do we see that in the narratives of the Hebrew Bible? Yeah, that's a tough question. Like what is good? Like or who? Like according to who it's good? Because of course, like this is a modern theory, but like I said, in many of these figures, we do see quite clearly like some exemplary features, and I suggest that beauty is just one side of that that character. I think like I said, with some women, we have a little bit of that, like at least that we see these clever female figures and who are courageous, and perhaps some of those figures are even more elaborated, I would say, in broader ancient Jewish literature. For instance, I'm thinking about a figure of Rebecca in Jubilees, who gets like, who becomes much more central figure. I think we cannot say yes or no. Like there are some some elements are there, but what is good? And here we have to be careful also not with our own modern standards. Like, would we consider someone going to war anymore good? So there's a risk of some biases. Your second question on was on race, right? Or on like skin color. Skin color. Well, I think there are some passages where dark skin is also mentioned as a sign of a beauty. I don't remember now from the top of my head, but I think I only mentioned David's skin color because it's present in that passage that talks about his beauty. But I think somewhere else, darker skin color is also.
Francis just helped us out. He sent us the reference. It's Song of Songs, chapter 1, verses 5 to 7, where the woman is described as dark and beautiful.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking now like some texts where like white skin color is a sign of sickness, like being leprous. If you're like Miriam in Numbers 12, her skin color is white as snow, and it means that she's not well.
Thank you very much. We're approaching the end of our time very fast, so I'm just going to encourage brief questions, brief answers, and then I have Rosanne Lieberman as the next person to ask a question. Rosanne, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned Joseph's coat and Esther's cosmetic treatment, and you briefly said that you thought that these would have added to their beauty. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about the relationship between the sort of natural beauty you talked about and then a more manufactured beauty through clothing or cosmetics, and whether you sense a sort of hierarchy in the Hebrew Bible. And so I was thinking, for example, as a counterexample of Ezekiel 23, where the promiscuous woman representing Jerusalem puts on jewelry and makeup to entice men, but she's not described as beautiful. And then just to interact with the conversation about age, this passage also, in this passage, God expresses surprise that the woman is still being promiscuous, and he says, you should be worn out with your adultery. And the word worn out there in Hebrew, bala, is the same word that Sarah uses of her womb to describe her infertility. So potentially here you have a woman beyond a fertile period who's not described as beautiful and yet is manufacturing a kind of beauty to attract men. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about that relationship.
Thank you. That's great. I don't think again that one can really argue that cosmetics are good or bad. I think it really depends on the dynamic of the story, and for instance, in the context of Esther, it just seems to be a part of the narrative, and maybe referring to procedures that women who entered in the harem context, what they went through. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Since here, at least on the European side of the ocean, it's getting a little bit late on in the day, I'm going to be strict about the time and say that we're going to stop for now. Although I have plenty of names on my list, and I'm sorry to all of you who didn't have a chance to ask your questions and make your comments. But I don't know, Hanna, would it be okay to send you an email in case there's something we didn't have time to address?
Oh, absolutely. I would be so happy to hear from you. I don't know if I'm able to answer the question, but I think like all this has been super stimulating and really gave me a lot to think about. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you to you. And before we give you the real applause, not the Zoom applause, I'm just going to mention that in 3 weeks' time, we have another lecture in our series, which is by Dr. Omar Enshir, who is also with us today. And Omar, who's from the University of Malta, is going to give us a lecture on masculinity and beauty in Mesopotamia. So basically, a brilliant continuation of what we've talked about today. And the next lecture is on Friday, November 13, and it's the same time again, 3 p.m. local time in Oslo. So do join us for that. I hope to see many of you again. And thank you so much to all of you for joining us this time. Thank you for all the brilliant comments and questions during the discussion. And then particularly thank you very, very much to you, Hanna, for a brilliant lecture and for engaging with us in this wonderful way. It's been wonderful listening to you and very inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing your work. And then it's goodbye from me, and I'll see if I can put all of you in the gallery here, and then we can give you a proper applause. Thank you so much.